Okay, so now continuing further from the last video, I just wanted to explain something a little bit further and clearer. And that is, when we're talking about real-world units in Blender, I mentioned that these things are tied in with dynamics and light properties and so on. But I want you to pay attention to something here. And part of the reasoning why I say don't mess with this scale value right here. Remember, the lights and everything, they all rely on real-world physics to some degree. Okay, so here, look at the gravity right down there, right now. So I'm going to change this unit scale to 0.5. Notice how the gravity did not change. It stayed the same. Okay, so that means that now I think that my cube is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, and yet it's actually twice that size, which means it's going to fall and move, you know, twice as heavier or with twice as much mass as I think that it is. So that my feedback is such that, well, I want this to be 2 by 2 by 2, so now I go 2, 2, 2, and it still comes out to 1 because 0.5, right? So that actually made 1. So I actually have to go 4 by 4 by 4 to make it 2. So I'm thinking that it's going to be 2 meters because of my feedback here, but it's actually, now that we put this back to 1, it's actually 4. Actually 4 meters. So that can be a problem, you know, when you're doing physics and calculating the distances of things and lights. So I just say keep this to 1. And to recap, if we go back over to LightWave, notice how this says display options for changing the units. It's not saying changing the default units. This absolute size tool is telling us that this thing is actually 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, but when we're setting it to English, it's actually 6.5 feet. So that's correct, but it's just a feedback. It's just a display and a feedback for the input parameters in these fields that we add, right? So when we add values into those input parameters, they're the values we want to be adding. Like if we want to be making it to exact English feet and inches, then we can add feet and inches and get those exact values. Or if we want metric, and so on. It's just feedback. It doesn't really change how big or small the thing is. Okay, so now we go back over to Blender, and so when you're exporting from Blender, you can actually change the scale of something. So keep this to 1, and if you are going to export and you want to change to the scale of another program, just do that in the export scale there. You can, like for FBX, you can change the scale there, right? That's a better solution. And when you're importing, a lot of the import scripts will automatically either allow you to set the scale when you're coming in, or adjust certain scales once you get them in, depending on the type of format when you get it in here. If it's an object, like an OBJ, well, you could just rescale it here, and that's, you know, simply solved. But when you get into animation and other things, it's more complex, obviously. But so now between Blender and LightWave, it is the same scale. It gets more complicated now if we add Maya into the mix, because Maya is set to 1 unit equals 1 centimeter, right? So 1 centimeter is actually 1/100th of a meter. So there's 100 centimeters in a meter. So if 1 unit in Blender is 1 centimeter, that's fairly infinitesimally small by comparison, right? So this here is the cube that I brought in from Blender. It is a 2 meter by 2 meter cube, but if you look in the top view in Maya, you see that it's 2 units by 2 units by 2 units, right? Well, those units equal 1 centimeter, which makes this thing really small. So I'm going to go into this a little bit further in the next video, but it's just good to note that also in Maya, the same recommendation. You don't want to go here to your settings and preferences and change the default units. You just don't want to do that. And for the same reasons you don't want to do it in Blender. Alright, so what I'm going to be talking about next is how to deal with all these different scales between the programs, what to do about that and what they are.